The rain was falling steadily on the black pavement outside Buckingham Palace that cold Tuesday morning in March. Thousands of tourists huddled under umbrellas, their cameras ready, waiting for one of the world's most famous ceremonies to begin. But what they didn't know was that behind the towering iron gates, a young guardsman named Thomas Mitchell was having the worst day of his military career. His hands were shaking as he adjusted his iconic red tunic for the 100th time. The massive bearskin hat felt heavier than usual on his head. In just 20 minutes, he would march out in front of those thousands of people, representing centuries of British tradition. But Thomas had just received news that would change everything about this particular ceremony. His younger sister Emma had been rushed to the hospital that morning. She was fighting for her life after a terrible car accident, and Thomas was the only family she had left. The doctor said the next few hours were critical. Every fiber of his being wanted to throw off his uniform and rush to her bedside. But he was a Queen's Guard, sworn to duty above all else. What happened next during that changing of the guard ceremony would become one of the most touching and extraordinary moments in the palace's long history. A moment that would remind the world that behind every perfectly pressed uniform and flawless march, there beats the heart of a human being. A moment that would prove that even the most rigid traditions can bend for love, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds of family. This is the true story of how one guardsman's personal crisis turned a routine ceremony into something magical. How the tourists who came expecting a simple military display witnessed something far more powerful. And how the ancient stones of Buckingham Palace became the backdrop for a lesson in what really matters in life. Thomas Mitchell had dreamed of becoming a Queen's Guard since he was 7 years old. Growing up in a small village in Yorkshire, he would spend hours marching around his backyard, using a wooden stick as a pretend rifle and wearing his father's old military beret that was far too big for his head. His sister Emma would sit on the garden fence, clapping and cheering as he performed his made-up ceremonies with all the seriousness a child could muster. Their father had been a guardsman too, before a knee injury ended his career early. He would tell Thomas and Emma stories about standing outside Buckingham Palace, about the pride he felt wearing the famous red tunic, and about the day he met the Queen during a garden party. Those stories filled Thomas with wonder and determination. When their father passed away when Thomas was 16, becoming a guardsman felt like more than just a career choice. It was a way to honor his father's memory and continue a family tradition. Emma had always been Thomas's biggest supporter. 3 years younger, she was the kind of sister who believed her brother could do anything. When Thomas struggled with the physical demands of military training, Emma would send him encouraging text messages every day. When he doubted himself during the grueling selection process for the Queen's Guard, Emma reminded him of all those childhood afternoons when he practiced in their garden. She was the first person he called when he finally received the news that he had been accepted into the prestigious unit. The training to become a Queen's Guard was unlike anything Thomas had experienced. Every movement had to be perfect. Every step had to be exactly 18 inches long. The famous bearskin hats weighed nearly 2 pounds, and guards had to learn to march and stand at attention for hours while wearing them. The red tunics had to be pressed to perfection, with every button polished until it gleamed. There was no room for error, no tolerance for anything less than absolute precision. Thomas threw himself into the training with fierce determination. He practiced the ceremonial drills until his muscles ached. He studied the history and protocols until he could recite them in his sleep. His instructors were tough, demanding men who had served for decades. They pushed the recruits to their limits, testing not just their physical abilities, but their mental strength and commitment to duty. The hardest part wasn't the physical demands or even the strict discipline. It was learning to suppress his natural human reactions. A Queen's Guard must remain absolutely still and expressionless, no matter what happens around him. During training, instructors would try to make the recruits laugh, flinch, or break their composure. They would tell jokes, make funny faces, or even have people in costumes walk past. Thomas learned to keep his face like stone, his eyes focused straight ahead, his body perfectly still. After 18 months of intensive training, Thomas finally earned his place in the Queen's Guard. The first time he put on the full ceremonial uniform, he called Emma immediately. She cried with joy on the phone, telling him how proud their father would have been. Thomas felt a deep sense of accomplishment and purpose. He was now part of something much larger than himself, a tradition that stretched back centuries. His first posting was at St. James's Palace, where he learned the daily routines and protocols. The guards worked in shifts, with some stationed at sentry boxes while others patrolled or prepared for ceremonies. Every day brought the possibility of encountering members of the royal family, visiting dignitaries, or thousands of tourists eager to catch a glimpse of the famous guards. Thomas quickly earned the respect of his fellow guards and superiors. He was known for his attention to detail, his reliability, and his genuine love for the job. Unlike some guards who saw their role as simply a military duty, Thomas understood the deeper significance of what he was doing. He was a living symbol of British history and tradition, a connection between the modern world and centuries of royal heritage. The changing of the guard ceremony became Thomas's favorite part of the job. Every other day, he would participate in this ancient ritual that drew tourists from around the world. The ceremony required perfect timing and coordination between the old guard and the new guard. The band would play traditional military music while the guards marched in formation, their movements so precise they looked like a carefully choreographed dance. Thomas loved watching the faces of the tourists as the ceremony unfolded. Children would point in wonder at the tall guards with their distinctive uniforms. Adults would snap countless photos, trying to capture the majesty of the moment. International visitors would whisper translations to each other, explaining what they were witnessing. For Thomas, each ceremony was a chance to be part of something that brought joy and wonder to people from all over the world. But the job wasn't without its challenges. Standing motionless for hours in all weather conditions tested even the most dedicated guards. Thomas had endured scorching summer heat that made sweat pool inside his heavy uniform. He had stood through winter storms that numbed his fingers and made his feet ache with cold. He had remained perfectly still while tourists tried to make him laugh or react, while children tugged at his uniform, and while street performers created distractions nearby. The mental discipline required was enormous. Guards were trained to focus on a single point in the distance, to empty their minds of personal concerns and concentrate only on their duty. They learned breathing techniques to stay calm and focus during long periods of stillness. They practiced meditation-like states that allowed them to endure physical discomfort without showing any sign of distress. Thomas had mastered all of these skills. He could stand motionless for hours, his mind calm and focused. He could march with perfect precision, his steps automatically falling into the required rhythm. He could maintain his composure no matter what distractions surrounded him. His superiors considered him one of their most reliable and disciplined guards. The bond between Thomas and Emma remained strong despite his demanding schedule. She would visit London whenever possible, always making sure to catch one of his ceremonies. She would position herself in the crowd of tourists, beaming with pride as she watched her brother perform his duties. After the ceremony, they would meet for dinner, and Thomas would share stories about his experiences while Emma told him about her life back in Yorkshire. Emma had followed a different path than Thomas. She was studying to become a teacher, working with young children who reminded Thomas of himself at that age, full of dreams and wonder. She often told him about her students who were fascinated by her brother's job as a Queen's Guard. She would show them photos and tell them stories, inspiring the same sense of awe that Thomas had felt as a child. Their relationship was built on mutual support and understanding. Thomas admired Emma's dedication to education and her natural ability to connect with children. Emma respected Thomas's commitment to service and tradition. They were different in many ways, but shared the same values their father had instilled in them: duty, honor, and loyalty to family above all else. As Thomas gained experience and seniority, he was given more responsibilities. He was selected for special ceremonies and state occasions. He had the honor of standing guard during royal weddings, state dinners, and visits from world leaders. Each assignment was a privilege that reinforced his pride in his chosen career. The morning of March 15th started like any other. Thomas woke before dawn in his quarters, as was his routine. He showered, shaved with military precision, and began the careful process of putting on his uniform. Every piece had to be perfect. The red tunic was brushed and pressed. The buttons were polished to a mirror shine. The white belt was cleaned and properly positioned. The black boots were buffed until they reflected light like glass. The bearskin hat required special attention. Thomas checked every detail, ensuring it sat properly on his head and that the chin strap was correctly positioned. He practiced a few marching steps in his room, checking his posture and timing. Everything felt normal and familiar. He was ready for another day of duty, another ceremony that would bring honor to his unit and joy to the watching crowds. Thomas had no way of knowing that this day would be different from all the others. He had no idea that in a few hours, he would face the most difficult decision of his military career. He couldn't have imagined that his commitment to duty and his love for family were about to collide in a way that would test everything he had learned about being a Queen's Guard. As he made his final preparations, Thomas thought briefly about Emma, as he did every morning. She was probably getting ready for work at her school in Yorkshire, preparing lessons for her young students. He smiled slightly, remembering how she used to watch him practice marching in their childhood garden. Those memories always gave him strength and reminded him why his work mattered so much. The morning briefing was routine. The Guard were informed about the day's schedule, the weather conditions, and any special considerations for the ceremony. Tourist numbers were expected to be high despite the threatening rain clouds. Several tour groups had scheduled visits, and the usual crowd of individual visitors would gather outside the palace gates. Thomas felt the familiar mix of anticipation and calm that always preceded a ceremony. He was ready to take his place in the ancient tradition, to represent centuries of British military excellence, and to provide another memorable experience for the thousands of people who would witness the changing of the Guard. He had performed this ceremony hundreds of times, and today felt no different from any other. The phone call came at exactly 7:45 in the morning, just as Thomas was adjusting his white ceremonial gloves for the final time. The sharp ring cut through the quiet of the Guard's preparation room like a knife. Protocol dictated that personal phones should be turned off during duty hours, but Thomas had been worried about Emma lately. She had mentioned feeling unwell during their last conversation, and something in her voice had concerned him. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Sarah Chun from Leeds General Hospital. Her words hit Thomas like a physical blow. Emma had been involved in a serious car accident on her way to work that morning. A truck had run a red light and struck her small car on the driver's side. She was currently in surgery, fighting for her life. The doctor's voice was professional, but kind as she explained that Emma had listed Thomas as her emergency contact. Thomas felt the world tilt around him. The carefully controlled environment of the Guard's quarters suddenly felt surreal and distant. The sound of his fellow guards making their final preparations seemed to come from far away. His hands, which moments before had been steady and sure, began to tremble slightly as he gripped the phone. The doctor was still talking, explaining Emma's injuries in medical terms that Thomas struggled to comprehend. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, possible head trauma. They were doing everything they could, but the next few hours would be critical. She needed her family there, the doctor said gently. She needed Thomas. Through the narrow window of the preparation room, Thomas could see the crowds already gathering outside Buckingham Palace. Hundreds of tourists stood behind the barriers, cameras ready, excitement visible on their faces. Tour guides were explaining the significance of the ceremony to their groups. Children were perched on their parents' shoulders for better views. The familiar sight that usually filled him with purpose now felt like a prison. Sergeant Major Williams noticed Thomas's distress immediately. The older man had served for over 30 years and had seen guards face personal crises before. He approached Thomas with a mixture of authority and compassion that made him an exceptional leader. When Thomas explained the situation, Williams's expression softened with genuine concern. Military protocol was clear in such situations. Family emergencies, especially life-threatening ones, took precedence over ceremonial duties. Williams could arrange for Thomas to be replaced immediately. A backup guard could step in, and Thomas could be on his way to Leeds within the hour. No one would question his decision to prioritize his sister's needs over his ceremonial duty. But as Thomas stood there, still in his full ceremonial uniform, he felt torn between two powerful forces. His love for Emma was absolute and unconditional. She was the only family he had left, his closest friend, his biggest supporter. The thought of losing her was unbearable. Every instinct told him to tear off his uniform and rush to her bedside immediately. Yet something else held him back. It wasn't just duty in the abstract sense that military regulations demanded. It was something deeper and more personal. Thomas thought about his father, who had instilled in both his children the importance of honoring commitments. He thought about the hundreds of tourists who had traveled from around the world to witness this ceremony. He thought about the children in the crowd who might be seeing their first changing of the guard, experiencing the same wonder he had felt as a boy. Most powerfully, he thought about Emma herself. She had always understood the importance of his role as a Queen's Guard. She had been so proud when he achieved his goal, so supportive of his dedication to the tradition. Emma knew better than anyone how much this job meant to him, how it connected him to their father's memory and to something larger than himself. Thomas found himself remembering a conversation they had shared just a few months earlier. Emma had been telling him about one of her students, a shy boy named Jamie who struggled with confidence. She had arranged for the class to visit London and watch the changing of the guard ceremony. Jamie had been mesmerized by the precision and dignity of the guards. For weeks afterward, he had practiced marching around the playground, standing taller and speaking with more confidence. Emma had been so excited as she told Thomas this story. She understood that his role was about more than just following orders or maintaining tradition. It was about inspiring people, about representing something noble and enduring in a world that often felt chaotic and uncertain. She was proud that her brother could have that kind of positive impact on others. The internal struggle was visible on Thomas's face as he weighed his options. Sergeant Major Williams waited patiently, understanding the complexity of the decision. Other guards in the room had become aware that something serious was happening, but they continued their preparations quietly, giving Thomas space to think. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in less than an hour. If Thomas was going to leave, the decision needed to be made immediately. His replacement would need time to prepare, and the complex choreography of the ceremony required every participant to be fully ready and focused. Thomas closed his eyes and tried to think clearly about what Emma would want him to do. Despite her current condition, despite the fact that she couldn't speak for herself, he felt he knew the answer. Emma had always encouraged him to honor his commitments, to be the kind of person their father would be proud of. She had taught her students the same values of duty and responsibility that their father had instilled in them. But the fear of losing her was overwhelming. The thought that she might die while he was performing his ceremony, that her last moments might pass while he was standing motionless in front of tourists, was almost unbearable. What if she woke up and asked for him? What if she needed to hear his voice? What if these were her final hours? Sergeant Major Williams approached Thomas again, his voice gentle but practical. The hospital was 3 hours away by car, he pointed out. Even if Thomas left immediately, he would arrive well after Emma's surgery was completed. The doctors had said the next few hours were critical, but they hadn't indicated that Thomas's presence would affect the outcome of her treatment. Williams also reminded Thomas that he could leave immediately after the ceremony if he chose to perform his duty first. The guard's quartermaster could arrange emergency transportation to Leeds. Thomas would still arrive at the hospital in time to be with Emma during her recovery, when his presence might be more meaningful and helpful. The decision crystallized in Thomas's mind with sudden clarity. He would perform the ceremony as scheduled, dedicating his service that day to Emma and to all the family members who had supported the guards throughout their careers. He would stand with perfect discipline and honor, representing not just centuries of British tradition, but also the values of duty and commitment that Emma had always admired in him. The choice wasn't about choosing duty over family. It was about honoring both in the way that felt most true to who he was and who Emma had helped him become. She had always understood that his role as a Queen's Guard was about service to others, about being part of something meaningful and lasting. Thomas believed that Emma, even in her current condition, would want him to fulfill that service with the same dedication she brought to her teaching. Sergeant Major Williams nodded with approval and respect when Thomas explained his decision. The older man had served long enough to recognize genuine character when he saw it. He promised to arrange immediate transportation to Leeds as soon as the ceremony was completed, and to ensure that Thomas received regular updates about Emma's condition throughout the morning. The other guards in the room had overheard enough to understand the situation. Without being asked, they formed an informal support network around Thomas. They would help ensure that the ceremony proceeded flawlessly, that Thomas's personal crisis didn't affect the quality of their collective performance. In their own quiet way, they were honoring both Thomas's dedication and Emma's fight for life. As the guards made their final preparations, Thomas felt a strange sense of calm settling over him. The decision was made, and now he could focus on the task ahead. He had learned during his training how to compartmentalize personal concerns when duty demanded it. But this was different. Instead of pushing thoughts of Emma away, he was incorporating them into his sense of purpose. The rain that had been threatening all morning began to fall lightly as the guards assembled for their march to the ceremony site. Thomas adjusted his bearskin hat and checked his rifle one final time. In a few minutes, he would step out in front of the waiting crowds and represent everything he had trained for and believed in. But this ceremony would be unlike any other he had performed. Every step would be taken with Emma in his heart. Every moment of perfect stillness would be a prayer for her recovery. Every precise movement would be a tribute to the values she had always supported. The tourists watching would see a flawless military ceremony, but Thomas would know that he was performing an act of love and dedication that went far deeper than any protocol or tradition. The rain had intensified by the time the guards marched out of the palace gates, but the crowd of tourists showed no signs of dispersing. If anything, the weather seemed to have made them more determined to witness the famous ceremony. Umbrellas bloomed like flowers throughout the gathered throng, and the clicking of camera shutters created a constant backdrop of sound despite the dampness. Thomas felt each raindrop on his face as he marched in perfect formation with his fellow guards. The familiar weight of his bearskin hat, the precise rhythm of his steps, and the disciplined focus required for the ceremony helped center his mind. Yet underneath the professional composure, his thoughts remained with Emma, lying unconscious in a hospital bed 3 hours away. The band began playing Scipio as the old guard prepared for the formal handover. The stirring military march echoed off the stone walls of Buckingham Palace, its notes rising above the soft patter of rain and the excited murmur of the crowd. Thomas had heard this music hundreds of times, but today each note seemed to carry additional weight and meaning. As the ceremony progressed through its ancient choreography, something remarkable began to happen among the watching tourists. Word was spreading quietly through the crowd about the young guard whose sister was fighting for her life. A tour guide had overheard part of Thomas's conversation with Sergeant Major Williams and had shared the story with her group. Those visitors told others, and soon hundreds of people knew that they were witnessing something far more significant than a routine military ceremony. The knowledge transformed the atmosphere in subtle but profound ways. The usual tourist chatter gave way to a more respectful silence. Parents pulled their children closer, using the moment to quietly explain concepts of duty, sacrifice, and love. Cameras still clicked constantly, but now they were capturing not just a colorful spectacle, but a human story of extraordinary courage and dedication. Thomas remained unaware of the shift in the crowd's attention. His training had taught him to focus straight ahead, to maintain his concentration despite any distractions. But even without seeing the faces around him, he could sense something different in the air. The usual restless energy of a tourist crowd had been replaced by something deeper and more focused. The formal exchange of duties proceeded with flawless precision. Each guard moved with the mechanical perfection that years of training had made instinctive. The timing was exact, the formations were crisp, and the entire ceremony unfolded like a carefully constructed piece of theater. Yet for Thomas, every movement was infused with emotional significance that went far beyond military protocol. When it came time for the guards to stand at attention for the extended, silent portion of the ceremony, Thomas felt the full weight of his decision. For 12 minutes, he would remain absolutely motionless while thoughts of Emma filled his mind. This was the test of mental discipline that every guard faced, but today it carried personal stakes that made it infinitely more challenging. Thomas fixed his gaze on a point in the distance and began the meditation-like focus that allowed guards to transcend physical discomfort and mental distraction. But instead of emptying his mind as he had been trained to do, he filled it with memories of Emma. He thought about her laugh, her unwavering support, her pride in his achievements. He remembered childhood games, late-night conversations, and the way her face lit up whenever she talked about her students. The rain continued to fall, creating small rivulets that ran down Thomas's face and soaked into his red tunic. His feet were growing cold in the heavy boots, and the bearskin hat felt heavier than usual on his head. But he remained perfectly still, drawing strength from thoughts of his sister and the value she had taught him about perseverance and dedication. Something extraordinary was happening in the crowd as well. The tourists who had come expecting entertainment found themselves witnessing something far more meaningful. Many were moved to tears as they watched Thomas maintain his perfect composure while carrying such a heavy emotional burden. The ceremony had become a powerful reminder of the human capacity for duty, love, and sacrifice. An elderly woman near the front of the crowd began to quietly weep as she watched Thomas. She had lost her own brother in military service decades earlier and recognized the profound strength it took to honor duty while facing personal crisis. Her tears were noticed by others nearby, and soon a wave of emotional understanding spread through the gathered tourists. Children in the crowd, sensing the gravity of the moment, even if they didn't fully understand it, became unusually quiet and attentive. Parents found themselves using the scene to teach lessons about courage, responsibility, and the importance of keeping commitments even when it's difficult. The ceremony had become an unexpected classroom for values that transcended cultural and national boundaries. Thomas remained unaware of his impact on the watching crowd, but he was deeply aware of the emotional weight of his choice. As the minutes ticked by, his resolve never wavered, but his heart remained with Emma. He found himself silently speaking to her, telling her about the ceremony, sharing his thoughts as if she could hear him across the distance that separated them. The mental conversation he held with Emma became a source of strength rather than distraction. He told her about the rain, about the tourists who had gathered despite the weather, about the music and the precision of his fellow guards. He described the ancient stones of Buckingham Palace and the weight of tradition that surrounded them. Most importantly, he told her how much he loved her and how proud he was to be her brother. When a discreet signal indicated that 12 minutes had passed, Thomas felt as though he had been standing there both forever and for just an instant. The meditation-like state had allowed time to become fluid and elastic. He had experienced every second of connection with Emma while also transcending the normal flow of time through disciplined focus. The remainder of the ceremony proceeded with continued precision. Guards marched, formations shifted, and the complex choreography of the handover was completed exactly as it had been for generations. But everyone present, from the guards themselves to the watching tourists, knew they had witnessed something exceptional. As the ceremony concluded and the new guard took their positions, Thomas felt a profound sense of completion. He had honored his duty while keeping Emma close in his heart. The choice to perform the ceremony had not meant abandoning his sister, but rather serving her memory and values in the most meaningful way possible. Sergeant Major Williams approached Thomas immediately after the formal conclusion of the ceremony. A car was waiting to take him to Leeds, and the latest update from the hospital was cautiously optimistic. Emma had survived the surgery and was stable, though still unconscious. The doctors were more hopeful about her chances of recovery. As Thomas prepared to leave for the hospital, something unexpected happened. Members of the crowd began approaching the palace gates, asking guards to pass along messages of support and admiration for Thomas. Tourists from around the world wanted him to know that they had been moved by his dedication and that they were thinking of his sister. The tour guide who had first shared Thomas's story collected dozens of these messages, along with small gifts and tokens for visitors who wanted to express their respect. Business cards with personal notes, flowers purchased from nearby vendors, and even drawings made by children in the crowd were gathered as tributes to both Thomas's service and Emma's fight for recovery. Word of the remarkable ceremony began spreading beyond the immediate crowd through social media and news outlets. Videos taken by tourists showed not just the military precision of the guards, but the emotional weight carried by one young man who had chosen duty without abandoning love. The story resonated with people around the world who recognized the universal themes of family, sacrifice, and commitment. As Thomas changed out of his ceremonial uniform and prepared for the journey to Leeds, he was given the collection of messages and gifts from the tourists. Reading through them in the car, he was amazed by the impact his decision had made on complete strangers. People from different countries and cultures had recognized something universal in his choice and had been inspired by his dedication. The 3-hour drive to Leeds gave Thomas time to process what had happened and to prepare for whatever he might face at the hospital. The ceremony had provided a kind of closure to the morning's crisis, allowing him to honor both his duty and his love for Emma in a way that felt authentic and meaningful. When Thomas finally arrived at Leeds General Hospital, he was exhausted but at peace with his choices. Emma was still unconscious but stable, and the doctors were increasingly optimistic about her prognosis. As he sat beside her bed, holding her hand and talking quietly about the morning's events, Thomas felt that he had found a way to be true to all the values that mattered most to him. The story of Thomas and Emma's mourning would continue to resonate long after the immediate crisis had passed. Emma would recover fully from her injuries, returning to her classroom with an even deeper appreciation for the values of duty and love that her brother had demonstrated. The tourists who witnessed the ceremony would carry the memory with them for years, sharing the story of the guard who showed that strength comes not from choosing between love and duty, but from finding ways to honor both. Thomas would continue his service as a Queen's Guard with a new understanding of what the role truly meant. It wasn't just about maintaining traditions or providing spectacle for tourists. It was about representing the highest human values of service, dedication, and the ability to find meaning in difficulty. Every future ceremony would carry the memory of that rainy March morning when duty and love proved to be not opposing forces, but different expressions of the same fundamental commitment to what matters most in life. The ancient tradition of the changing of the guard had been enriched by a very human story of love, choice, and the courage to honor multiple commitments simultaneously. The ceremony would continue for generations to come, but Those who witnessed Thomas's dedication would always remember that behind every perfect uniform and flawless march stands a human being capable of extraordinary grace under pressure.